What's up, mortals? It's Miggy Sawdust here with a new video for you. Welcome to part 19 of What If Izuku Got One for All Early. Just wanted to greet you all by just saying sit back and relax. You're in for a treat. Let's get started. Several months passed and Izuku was admitted out of the hospital after a couple of months of rehabilitation. He could do little more than the essential motor functions. He was capable of walking, holding and lifting light objects. Even his jaw wasn't fully back to normal, so it would hurt to eat anything that bit with a crunch. He had burn marks surrounding his body like wiring, a side effect of Black Whip's forceful assistance of holding his body together. Despite how bad things looked, though, it was due to Black Whip's forcing his body to function correctly that he didn't suffer permanent body deformation, or even amputation. Perhaps his body was too hot for bacteria to grow in his bloodstream, because there were no signs of infection. There were a few brutal-looking bruises and torn skin along his back. They had used a skin graft to cover up his spine. Izuku found himself sitting at the police department. He had a back-and-forth conversation with Detective Sukachi. Since he had been in the hospital for so long, the detective couldn't make time to meet with him. It was time for Izuku to explain his side of the story, and he laid bare the trials he went through. He even mentioned that he was responsible for 2 separate fatalities. Nomu had been admitted since they were nothing but instruments of war who'd lost their humanity. I never caught the name of the first one, but his quirk allowed his muscles to grow. He had one eye and blonde hair. Sukachi scrambled through some of the documents that carried info on potential League of Villain members that were yet to be clarified. He showed the carnal murderer Muscular's file. Izuku nodded, clarifying that he was the one he fought, the second being the giant. There aren't any records of such a creature, and a body was never found. Not to say I don't trust you, Izuku, but people with giant quirks aren't exactly hard to miss. Not to mention, there's no record of such a creature ever being born. He was there. Trust me. However, the body disintegrated when Shigaraki absorbed his quirks. Izuku twiddled his sewn-up thumbs. He felt uncomfortable being put in this position, admitting to murder. Something that heroes never do. Sukachi noted down what Izuku had to say. It at least solved the mystery behind the lack of a body being found, but questions still remained. Izuku, I have my suspicions, but I believe Shigaraki wasn't the brains behind these events. I think there was someone else backing his plan. You wouldn't happen to know anyone, would you? Izuku shook his head. From what I've been told by my friends, most of the villains who were part of the scheme were sent to Tartarus. Outside of a few Nomu whose bodies were never found, no one escaped justice. Yes, I'm already aware of that. Well, I guess that leads us to a dead end then. The detective sighed as he tipped his fedora. He stood up, collecting his files under his binder. Not to say you won't see any backlash for committing murder twice, but for what you did for the good of society, I'd like to say you've done us all a great service. I'll see what I can do about keeping those bodies off your record. Oh, and you also acted like a licensed hero, which you're not. So, UA staff will be held responsible for the lack of putting your safety first. UA is going to be shutting down by the end of the year. Your teachers, heroes, and teaching licenses have all been temporarily revoked. Izuku jolted after hearing the bad news. But, I would like to extend an olive branch to the students. We'd like you all to relocate to Shiketsu High. When UA staff has once again been granted their right to teach, we'll be opening UA up again, but under different and more strict guidelines. Izuku took a few seconds to cope with the idea, and refreshed himself with a deep breath. He nodded. We'll also be sending recommendation letters to each of your addresses. Now, the only obstacle in your way would be your parents at this point. Inko sat across the table from her little boy, a paper lying flat in the middle of the dining room table separating them both. Silence enveloped the room, and Izuku sat there awkwardly, still wrapped in bandages. Meanwhile, Inko took on a more stern position. You should already know how I feel about this. Izuku nodded. The most challenging thing for him right now was to willingly go against his mother's wishes. So, I talked with the detective earlier today. Izuku couldn't help but avoid eye contact. Nothing was scarier or more pressurizing than the discouragement of a worried mother. Inko sighed, setting the recommendation slip aside. We've done this before, you know. Last time I was worried sick that you weren't going to fulfill the future you wanted. Though, despite the odds, that's precisely what you did. You persevered. However, as you may already be aware, I'm worried sick for another reason. I shouldn't have to remind my baby boy of the dangers of the future you seek, Izuku. After all, you've experienced it firsthand. When I visited you at the hospital that day, I wasn't sure if I would ever get to see you open your eyes again. The number of tissues I went through seeing what happened at Kamina Ward, well, let's just say I don't need to buy anymore. My frail heart can't take this anymore, baby. Don't you see your mother's begging you to try something else? Izuku was really in a bind. How could he not feel some sort of sympathy for his suffering mother, especially after the heartfelt speech she just gave? He didn't want to worry her anymore, and he felt horrible for putting her through that strain. His voice caught in his throat. The back of his tongue felt parched, and he dripped a cold sweat. What he had in mind to say would be a selfish request, and there was no doubt it would do little more than upset her. I... That's when the doorbell rang. The sound of the bell sent a spine-tingling chill down Izuku's back before relief came over him. Midoriya stood up, using the table as assistance before making his way to the door. I'll get it. Inko grabbed his wrist to sit him back down. You, mister, need to relax. I'll be fine getting it myself. She took a moment to change her tone and made her way to the front door. She checked the door magnifier to see who could be on the other side. She was greeted by a black-haired man wearing lovely attire, but his eyes were droopy. Standing next to him was a mint-green-haired young lady, who seemed to be chattering at him. Inko hesitantly unlocked the door and opened it. Hello? May I help you? They both nodded and revealed their identification cards. My name's Shoto Aizawa. I was your son's teacher before UA closed. And I'm Ami Fukukado, but you may know me as a hero Miss Joke. I'll be potentially Izuku's future teacher. Aizawa told me a lot about him. Inko jolted with celerity. Her house was subpar in terms of cleanliness, and she wasn't expecting visitors to begin with. But the teachers made her all the more nervous. Izuku, sweetie? Could you come here? Aizawa rose his hand, signaling her to relax. It's all right, ma'am. We won't take long. I just wanted to talk with you and your son about that night. The atmosphere once again grew tense from mentioning the past. Inka wore a more serious face as her composure returned. Very well. Would you like some tea? Aizawa thought about it for a second. Oh, no thank... Miss Joke immediately interrupted. We would love some, thank you! Inko whipped up some hot matcha tea, and they all found themselves sitting down at the dining room table. Aizawa took a sip of his cup and began speaking. This tea's immaculate, Mrs. Midoriya. Thank you. Inko nodded with a smile. Anyway, Izuku, as you're probably aware of the recommendation form to Shiketsu, UA is going to be shutting down for a time. Due to this, I'm not going to be your teacher until UA is back in business, and we'll have to reevaluate you guys as students. I'm swinging by all of you to see if you're okay, check up on you, and specifically talk to all your parents to see their opinions on the matter. Aizawa sipped his tea once again, and Miss Joke continued on. I understand that you've been through a great deal of grief since that day, and I'd say that Izuku had the most significant headline. He was by far the most injured out of his classmates, so I wouldn't put it against you to not offer your hand of acceptance to allow us to take in such a gifted potential. Inko tightened her grip around the teacup. Her voice wobbled. Izuku was unsure if she was going to break down under pressure. However, she didn't falter under the request. Don't get me wrong. I think it's a nice gesture to know you two made your way here to inform us. However, I just can't stand seeing my little boy go out there and destroy himself like he did. I am aware that this is just dumb luck on how bad things got. After all, my baby saved the day that night. He beat the bad guy. She shared with them a joyous smile, that of an eccentric, proud mother. But that smile dimmed shortly after. Just knowing any time in the future he could end up like this again is just too much for me to bear. He's already been suffering from permanent damage. My baby's skin will never look the same again. Not to mention it was more of a miracle than a certainty that his bones are still able to function. I just don't know if I can be comfortable knowing I'll send him out only for the same thing to happen again. So I'm sorry, Mr. Aizawa, Miss Joke, but I don't think I'll be sending my boy to Shiketsu. Nor do I think I'll enroll him back into UA when it reopens. Izuku jolted from his seat. But Mom! Inko retaliated by setting her cup down aggressively. A bit of tea spilled on her hand, but she ignored the pain. I don't want to hear it, Izuku! She paused, taking a deep breath. The worried mother took some time to grab a hand towel and wipe the hot tea from her hands. She returned to her seat. Izuku's voice buckled in the back of his throat. He wanted to speak up, but to do so would ignore her feelings. You do realize how far Shiketsu is, right, Izuku? You're a public figure now. Everyone saw your fight on the news. Going back and forth to school every day can make you an easy target. Something in Miss Joke lit up in her mind. Oh! She reached into her purse and brought out a brochure. It displayed content of the dorms at the school grounds. She presented it to Inko, and she took it. I can assure you the dorms we have on campus will make your son feel like he's living in an estate. It's pretty fancy stuff. Aizawa cringed at this. It was embarrassing to react like this to such a sincere mother. Miss Joe, can you please show some sensitivity? Mrs. Midoriya needs more time to think about this. Don't just show brochures of Shiketsu's fancy dorms. Izuku sat idly by. He felt it wasn't his place to speak up in a conversation for adults. Though he observed regardless, this was his immediate future they were talking about after all. Midoriya, how do you feel about all this? Despite your mother presenting her heartfelt emotions, are you still willing to be a hero? This threw off the young man. He wasn't even sure if he still had some kind of say in the matter. Mom? His voice broke as he continued on. I still want to be a hero. That's always been my dream, to be like All Might. To save the day with a smile. I just want to be like my favorite hero. Dad, he was never really around for us, so I never had a father figure. Well, All Might was that replacement. He was the one I needed to fill that void. He's the one I idolize outside of you. I want to respect your wishes, so if you really don't want me to be a hero, because you're worried, then maybe I can become a cop or something. I don't really care if I go to Shiketsu or not. Izuku stepped away from the table and walked upstairs, looking down. This broke Inko's heart, but it also gave the teachers an excuse to start making their way to the next house. They both grabbed their coats and began heading out. Inko followed them, guiding them out of the house, before they left. Ultimately, Izuku made his way back downstairs with a letter. It was from Koda. Mom, this was from the little kid I saved that night. I'm already a hero to someone. Just knowing I ultimately improved someone's life by just being there, it feels amazing. I'd be grateful if you allowed me to keep up my dream. Izuku bowed aggressively to his mother. Inko fell to her knees after breaking down. Part of her felt proud to know her little boy already sees himself as the awesome hero he could be. But another there was nothing she could do ultimately to keep him safe, and she knew that now. She faced the duo who stood at the doorstep. Under one condition. Under one condition, I'll allow him to go. He will enroll only after he's fully recovered per the doctor's recommendation. They both smiled at each other and nodded. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Midoriya. We should be on our way. Aizawa looked up at Midoriya with a smirk, winking to him to signal he was looking forward to being his teacher once more. See you later, hero. In Tartarus, within the deepest, most top-secret, secluded area of the facility, a dark cell was present. The room was completely black, and there seemed to be no sign of life within. Stain stood outside of the cell, cross-armed and back towards the wall. Seems you did your end of the bargain, you crazy bastard. Well, I guess now it's time I do my end of the deal. You mentioned you had a point of contact for me from the Yakuza? A few guards caught wind of the noise and rushed to where the voice echoed. By the time they showed up in front of the cell, Stain was already gone. Shigaraki was stabbed into the wall by massive nails. They had been pounded into each of his joints. His messy hair hovered in front of his face, and he gazed up and bared his fangs with a smile. A couple of months passed, and Izuku was now officially recovered. However, the more permanent damages still took a toll on his appearance. He finished packing his room up. His room was now entirely empty. He looked back on it, noticing the height markings on the doorway. He rubbed his thumb along the different heights. 3'7", 4'2", 4'6", 5'1", 5'5". Izuku reminisced on all the childhood memories he made in this house. He was going to miss this place for sure. Izuku stepped out of the front door with his backpack. He hugged his mother after she rambled on and on about if he had everything. Izuku tried slithering away from her clutches until he was finally met by Aizawa in front of the car. Welcome back, Midoriya. Everyone else has been waiting for you already. This kind of pumped up the young hero. It had been ages since he last saw his friends, specifically when he was still undergoing muscle therapy, which at this point happened almost half a year ago. Can't wait! They arrived at Shiketsu after a semi-long road trip. Izuku began unpacking his things and was reunited with his classmates once again. They all commented about his appearance, or how he was feeling, but he eventually got around to satisfy their curiosities. He unpacked everything into his dorm, wallpapers and action figures of All Might as far as the eye could see. Izuku took a glimpse into his finished dorm, thinking back to his time with All Might when he was still alive. Now that he thought about it, he hadn't been in contact with his one-for-all dreamscape in a long time. He simply disregarded this realization and moved on. He is starting off fresh after all. Thank you, All Might, for everything. Izuku shut off the light and left the dorm building. He was the last one to leave. It was the first day of school for him, so he had no choice but to look his best. He adjusted his Shiketsu uniform. It was a bit much from what he was used to back in UA, especially the hat. He smiled as he played with his hat, making sure he wore it correctly. Aizawa waited to escort the fresh face of Shiketsu at the dorm entrance. However, what would have been a fun stroll was cut short by the utter confusion and terror commencing before Izuku. He gazed at his ex-teacher, who was embraced by another young pillar. How could this be? Izuku had no time to react before Aizawa disintegrated into dust, and all that was left standing was Izuku staring at himself. No, father. I did it again. Thank you all for sticking around, and I hope you enjoyed that. Before you leave, we'd just like to let you know that We the Celestials has many other channels for your entertainment and viewing purposes. All the information you'll need is right below here in the description, so feel free to check out all our other incredible projects that our team creates. Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. That's all for today's video, so goodbye and have a divine day. Dekuverse coming soon.